Roger. Huh?
LA departure frequency 123.9er.
Roger. Huh? Request vector. Over. What?
Flight 209er clear for vector 324.
We have clearance, Clarence. Roger, Roger. What's our vector, Victor?
Tower radio clearance over.
Then Clarence over. Over.
Roger.
Huh?
Roger, over.
What? Hey! Who?
Been in the cockpit before?
No, sir, I've never been up in a plane before.
You ever seen a grown man naked? Do you want me to check the weather, Clarence? No, why don't you take care of it? Joey, you ever hang around the gymnasium?
I'm gonna get back now, Joey.
No, Joey can stay here for a while.
Could I?
Captain, your navigator, Mr. Unger, and your first officer, Mr. Dunn. Unger, over. Over. Dunn. Unger, didn't you serve under Over in the Air Force?
Not directly. Technically, Dunn was under Over, and I was under Dunn.
Yep. So, Dunn, you were under Over and over Unger.
Yep. That's right. Dunn was over Unger, and I was over Dunn.
So you see, both Dunn and I were under Over, and even though I was under Dunn.
I need to stop smoking this shit here.
He was a draftsman and a very smart one, a very capable person who was being asked to draft the designs of the Navy program that is now in effect.
So what was the program called?
It wasn't called that at the same time, but at that time, it was Solar Warden.
Slavery down in Antarctica right now. So why are they not being protected?
Well, we don't have control over what they're doing to the Nazis doing in Antarctica.
Well, there's slavery obviously happening on our planet.
And this. You notice it's serrated on the sides and it's serrated on the top. Look what's coming out of the back of it in color. 5 separate gases coming out of this reptilian tanker, dropping 5 gases at 300 feet. You're smoking their gas today because they drop this gas only on technically advancing communities.
We have been contacted. Why have we not been contacted? Contact. How? What is up? Just like this now. Alien weapons in the form of plasma energy captain. Exact composition unknown. Guidance system unknown.
Advancing communities on the planet. Okay? Every 4 to 6 weeks. So you can be getting it today. Not 1. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. They didn't see it because everybody's minds are controlled to not see it, just like a stealth system. So the commander of this squadron made sure that that stealth was turned on. He forgot to turn on the stealth that prevents the camera from photographing it. Okay? So, the reason you don't see these, they're flying all over us. There's hundreds of them, there's thousands of them every single day on your planet.
And it included help on some of their projects, help with the technologies that they needed, help with memory wiping technology, a number of other areas, medicine, transportation, communications, weaponry. The positively oriented aliens that were trying to advance the human race, that provided some of the technology about anti-grav, they did not, the Germans, they didn't get destructive technology from those aliens. They got weapons and the weaponizing technologies from other ones, from the Draco specifically.
And it can be said without a doubt that there's never been an explosion of technology that...
The reptilian race was helping the Germans, required that we want you to build a base in Antarctica.
Dracos, are you saying?
Yes.
The reptilians of the Dracos? Who are the Draco?
The Draco are a group of alien entities that are reptilian evolved. They range in height from 8 to 14 feet tall. It's my understanding that there are also some variations of them that are shorter than that. Some of them have vestigial tails and wings.
Okay, so the Dracos are now in alliance with the Germans at the beginning of the 1940s?
Yes, and working together with them.
Okay, so they had gone to Antarctica in 1938, the first polar expedition by the Germans. And you're saying in the early 40s they were told to make the base there?
They were told to build a base there. And so they built a base under the ice capable of sustaining upwards of 300,000 to 400,000 people.
Whoa.
And so they started stocking it out and building it out. And the purpose for that, and of course the Draco didn't tell them this at the time, but they wanted to have a proxy in place that would help them recover some of the alien technologies that were down there, are down there.
I see, and they were, of course nobody knows about the place, so you can work with no one knowing what you're doing.
Nobody around, that's right.
Perfect place.
That's right. So the end of the war marked a period where the group that was down there said, thankfully we can get away from this self-destructive government, we can run things the way we want to, working on their base defenses, working on their technology. By 1947, they had mastered the mobile platform weapons so that they were able to outfit their anti-gravity.
And right now we are 1951 or so in our story. And we know we were developing anti-gravity vehicles and other things. So the United States is being changed by this ordeal. Historically, a very pregnant moment.
Yes, absolutely. The late 40s marked a very crucial moment in the development of the Antarctic German civilization. That was when they started building out their bases away from Earth. They wanted to build a base on the moon and had to find somebody that was willing to give up real estate. And those Draco were the ones that they were able to get real estate from. And the deal that they made was for a 100-year lease. The agreement included assistance with technology. The Draco weren't going to hand over advanced technology to them. They were providing them with assistance on the advanced technologies and had continued to do that. The story that Johann relayed to me about the very disturbing exchange that happened. The Antarctic Germans did not tell the people
of alien races that are on the moon and have bases on the moon. They jealously guard their property. There's no fighting, but if you try and take over somebody else's land, they're allowed to defend themselves. And the Mars Germans did not have technology to take that kind of fight. So they had to find somebody that was willing to part with some of their land. And it turns out that the Draco either bribed, blackmailed, or manipulated it so that the only race the Germans could go to ask for was the Draco. And so the negotiations that ensued between the Draco and the Mars Germans was for 20 acres of land. And the Draco were originally asking for 225 females and 50 years of first refusal rights for the technology that the Germans uncover in Antarctica. Well, the Germans immediately said, there's no way we're giving you 225 females. First off, it's a practical matter. We need as many childbearing females as we can to continue our society. So 6 months later, they were able to hammer out a deal where the Antarctic Germans provided 150 males, 75 females, and they gave the Germans 25 years of first refusal rights of the technology.
The technology there was under the ice.
That was under the ice. That in a lot of circumstances looked like a rock. They didn't know what they had.
Sure.
What later the Germans found out is that there were at least 6 other races that would have given them twice the amount of space for not a single person and 1 year worth of first refusal rights. So the Germans were suckered horribly. The stories that my friend told me during the exchange was very eye-opening as to the type of beings that they were dealing with.
Why did the Dracos want these people? What's the purpose?
They wanted to use them for experiments. They wanted to use them for manipulation.
Experiments.
They wanted to use them for food source. There's any number of reasons why they wanted to use them.
So basically slaves?
Slave labor, for their own form of entertainment. They were able to hammer out a deal where the Antarctic Germans provided 150 males, 75 females, and they gave the Germans 25 years of first refusal rights of the technology.
The technology there was under the ice.
It was under the ice. Very disturbing to think that those people that were in negotiations, because I asked my friend about that, well, what did the negotiators think? You're handing over your people to an unknown fate. And his response was they were there, it was all business, and besides, none of their families were going to be the ones turned over.
Do we know where they got these people?
It was from their own citizenry at that point.
Oh, really? So it was German? They were demanding? Were they demanding German?
No, but that was all they had access to at that.
You mentioned the Vril Society. So the Vril Society, you had somebody channeling?
Yes, Maria Orsich. That was the channel that they were using.
So this early channeling was from extraterrestrials?
Yes.
And it was real information that they were giving?
It was, and they doubted it at first until they started building out what was included in the blueprints. And the drawings that were made, that were channeled, were engineering drawings that included sizes, dimensions, information on materials. They included everything they needed to do to recreate these craft. Johann relayed to me about the very disturbing exchange that happened. The Antarctic Germans did not tell the people that were being traded what they were doing, where they were going to. They had 53 guards that were there, that were armed. The Draco showed up. They herded all these people into a cavern that they were supposed to meet at and activated some type of stun device which froze everybody in place. The images that they were psychically sending to everybody in that cavern were only able to be told about because 2 of the guards were outside the field radius when it happened. The images that they were seeing were sent, included human-on-human mutilation, assault, cannibalism, just about every type of deprivation, mutilation imaginable was sent to these people. Psychically, of their own family members.
Why would they do that?
They wanted to scare them because they thought it was funny. It's the only thing I can think is that there was some, to them, it was entertaining. So the two guards that were outside the field ran. There were three that were outside the field initially, but one of them on his way to the exit was caught by the field. Caught in the field. The Draco that were there to pick up their subjects were in full battle armor, and so there was nothing that any of those guards could have done to harm them, much less try and protect the people. Besides, they were there to turn them over.
Yeah.
The two guards that did survive were never the same afterwards. In fact, they weren't able to be conscious without going into extreme distress or going psychotic. And it took, from what I understand, about a year for them to get to a point where they wouldn't go into a catatonic state. Coincidentally, they both suicided about 5 years later. And so, all told, that day, the Draco took 278 souls. And the repeated requests by the Germans about the whereabouts or the remains would never answer it. So these were the type of beings that the Germans were dealing with, and they vowed from that day forward that they would never exchange their own people if they needed to, and eventually they would. And so they would find other sources of people to be used as pawns. So that was in the late 40s, and that got them the 20 acres of land on the moon to build the Lunar Operations Command.
Well, that has to be a pretty pivotal moment for this whole thing, because you're finally off planet and you have a base off planet, which can allow you to then go to other places.
That's correct.
In a much easier fashion.
That's correct. That was also around the same time they started perusing for Mars real estate. The problem with Mars is that there are sections of the planet that are highly energetic, and you can't build anything with electronics because of the charged particles in the atmosphere. So there's only certain areas that they can build out. Unfortunately for them at that time, they were occupied. So they had to create a bridgehead and fight for the property that they wanted, the land that they needed.
Who did they fight?
They were alien races.
Really? On Mars?
On Mars.
Not Draco?
Not Draco.
Do you know what they looked like?
Don't know.
Did the Germans succeed in this battle?
It took them about 10 years.
Really?
And cost them over 17,000 lives in doing it. And 17,000 may not sound like a large number, but if you do percentage-wise, it accounts for all of the Allies' losses in World War II, percentage-wise. Of their population. So it was a large number, and it was also the most productive, the youngest, the most active portions of their society. So they were reeling from those losses. When they first established their Mars base, and as a result, they stepped up their negotiations with the Cabal because they needed not only to have a final treaty, but primarily they needed people. They needed active people that can do what they needed to do. So they stepped up their negotiations with the Cabal, which accounts for the extremely large number of UFO sightings in the early 50s, and including the 1952 mass sighting over Washington, D.C. itself over 2 weekends.
And you think that was the Germans?
That was the Germans.
A show of force?
Show of force. They were trying to force the hand, and they still could not get the Cabal to talk.
Well, that seems to be about the time, though, that the back of the Cabal was broken by the Germans.
Yes, and Johann seemed to think that the final straw, because the Antarctic Germans kept telling the Cabal, look, we've got nukes, and they want to test us, and they didn't believe it. So what they did was they provided a demonstration strike on a lonely single heavy cruiser returning from Bikini Atoll, from one of the U.S.'s owned nuclear tests.
Mm-hmm.
And they dropped a small yield device close enough that the EMP disabled the ship. And what they had was they had 4 of their saucers on station at 60 kilometers. That's what Johann told me. It's about 200,000 feet.
They fired the munition, and the 3 of them stayed on station at altitude. They waited for it to, the Germans' UFOs descended within 5 seconds down to within 100 feet of the stricken heavy cruiser. The heavy cruiser crew tried shooting at the one UFO with the weapons that were still operational, and they couldn't hit it, so they gave up and went about repairing the ship so they could limp back to Hawaii.
And what is an EMP?
Electromagnetic pulse is
an invisible energy field that emanates from a nuclear detonation that interrupts electronics, melts wires, basically wreaks havoc on anything that's modern.
So they killed the ship?
They killed the ship without destroying it.
That's a demonstration of power.
Yes.
So you're bringing up this idea that I think it might be surprising to people, and I think a lot of people think that the Antarctic Germans are part of the cabal, but in fact they aren't.
They're not.
Are they against the cabal?
They were very vehemently against the...
What did Johann say the Germans on Mars were the most proud of?
They were proud of not being a part of the cabal and being able to dictate terms to the cabal.
So they liked being an adversary to the cabal?
They did.
There's still a base up on Mars right now?
Yes. Okay. Yes. They sent these messages to all the royal families in Europe. They sent it to the President of the United States. They sent it to the Prime Minister of Germany. They sent it to the head of the Communist Party of the USSR.
And so they were making sure that there was no misunderstanding that what they intended, what they were capable of, and they didn't want the U.S. to say, oh no, we never got a message, we didn't get anything, so the cat was out of the bag at this point. The entire world knew what they were capable of and what they were wanting, and they were wanting a formalized treaty.
And they got it.
They got it.
Soon after.
Very soon after. It took about 4 years to get the wording right. 1954 to 1959, 4 or 5 years. And the Antarctic Treaty is the result of those negotiations.
And what was given and what was taken on this in these negotiations?
Well, the non-publicized portion of the treaty includes, again, reaffirming the sovereign nation of the Antarctic Germans. It required the cabal to provide upwards of 150 to 200,000 people to the Antarctic Germans, and these weren't dregs of society either. They had very specific IQ and physical requirements of people that they wanted.
And this is in the 50s?
This was the brain drain of the 1950s and 60s.
60s, actually. That's when the brain drain started, around 60, 61. Mm-hmm. I see, okay.
Yep, late 50s.
Makes a lot of sense.
1959. They also increased their requirement from not just senior executives, but they now wanted between 1 and 5 board member seats on all of the corporations that they had senior executives in. They also required a permanent lifetime position within the executive branch of each government on the planet. That was a Mars German. And so it solidified their positions within the governments. So now they had people that were within each of these companies, and it wasn't hard for them to work their way up from vice president to president because they give their people some advanced technologies to take to their companies, and now they're fast-tracked because they are these brainchilds that brought this wonderful product A or B to the table, and now the company's making a lot of money, so sure. It self-propagates.
Yeah. That's still going on, by the way.
It's still going on.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's just amazing all the stuff that's going on. So it was made on Jupiter.
By who? By what race?
By, I don't know.
Just the Soviet team,
And it's been towed around to the different moons doing exactly what it's doing now, and that is monitoring whoever lives on there and abducting or doing whatever it is they would like to do. Now, it doesn't have its own propulsion, it has to be towed. And our moon was towed into its orbit now about 15,000 years ago, just after the Ice Age, the last Ice Age. And when man first became aware of the moon, or aware of skies, there was no moon, and then there was 2 moons, and then there was 1 moon. And we think that the 2 moons was the vehicle that towed our moon into space. In the back part of the Remake of Saturn, he discusses how the moon was towed into its orbit in his proof. And his proof is that Mario Antel, one of the craters on the back, it's not actually a crater, but it's a place, it has concentric rings, right? And he thinks that's where they grabbed onto it. And he proposed that an EMV, electromagnetic vehicle, towed it into place. I said, where do you think it is now? And he said, I think they parked it on the far side until they're ready to use it again. So I started looking for it and found it immediately on the crater Joukowsky. and Tchaikovsky's on the far side. It has a very interesting history. NASA has airbrushed, completely changed the character of that crater 8 times. And, it's absolutely for sure that is the electromagnetic vehicle that towed the moon into orbit. So, and the moon has a civilization. There's humans that live up there, and of course everybody says, "Oh, well, maybe we can't go to the moon."
Well, yeah, right.
No,
that was my next question.
We aren't the only humans in this universe.
Right. Are there any Earth humans there?
Not that I don't know. They've picked up thousands of Earth humans and taken them there for visits. Right. Not only he was invited up there, but there was a number of other people, scientists and other people with him.
Was it the United States, or was it a group of
different
countries were all grouped together?
Right.
Yeah.
And they told him that they had been doing this for 100 years, taking people up. But of course, nobody wants to tell that story because nobody's going to believe it. And he became a advisor to the Pentagon when he got back because he knew so much about what was going on. They took him there for 2 weeks. First week is spent going into decompression because the breathable atmosphere is equal to about 15 to 18,000 feet here on Earth.